Everybody, glad to see so many faces already joined us tonight. So welcome if you're watching us live, and also if you're watching our YouTube recording. Thank you again for joining, and thank you to Mahesh behind the scenes tonight, making things run smoothly as always. We've got a lovely evening tonight. I must admit, I'm surprised it's taken me this long to get round to do an introduction to Argentina. It's a wine growing country that I love. The styles of wine are very interesting, and there's a lot of uniqueness. So I'm really excited to explore that with you. If you're expecting a big Malbec session, then this won't be it. That's not that I won't cover Malbec, but if you haven't already signed up, we do have another session next week on Tuesday that really gets into the nitty-gritty of Argentinian Malbec. So hopefully you'll join me in exploring the wonders of this country in its totality. And then hopefully you'll also join Mahesh and I next week on Tuesday to cover Malbec. Before we kick off, please note that there is a Q&A button. You can use that to ask questions. There's also a chat. I can see some of you are already using it, so thank you so much. And if you're using the chat, so far everyone's done well, but remember to hit everyone and not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, it's just Mahesh and I that see you. So we'd much prefer, if you want to chat to your fellow members, please do so. Any technical questions, then you are welcome to message Mahesh directly, and he's just Tastings team, and he's our behind the scenes man tonight. And of course, as always, you can drop me a note as well, and I will try to see it, of course, as we go through. If you have joined with wines tonight, we're going to start with the Torrontés in a moment. We're then going to go on to our Bonarda and then finally close on the Malbec tonight. But I'm going to, as is usual with the sip size events, talk a bit, taste a bit, talk a bit, taste a bit. But obviously, if you've got something poured, please don't wait for me to taste it. Whatever it is in your glass, please start tasting, start drinking. This is meant to be informative and informal at the same time. So let's kick off. Argentina is one of, I've already mentioned, a really special and very unique wine producing country. But what many people, I think, maybe don't realize is that Argentina is actually in the top 6 wine producing countries of the world. And in terms of its history, it's actually got a longer history of growing European grape varieties than the USA. So while the USA we think of Californian wine as being top tier and perhaps fine wine and the next frontier after European wine, it's just not historically the case. And actually, when Argentina was colonized, Vitis vinifera, which is the European grape species, was already there. And there are a few possible explanations. They believe that there's been all sorts of Spanish, Peruvian, Chilean expeditions that may have dropped the Vitis vinifera grapevine off in Argentina, and that dates back as far as the 1500s. In fact, the first recorded vineyard in Argentina was 1557. So it's an old wine growing region, or country, I should say, and a lot of people perhaps don't really recognize that. I'll show you the country as a whole. We'll do a bit of geography in a second, because I think with me, the history of this country is one of the true beauties of it. So I will focus on the history for a moment, but I wanted to show you a map. It is quite spread out. The city of Mendoza, which I would argue is probably the one everyone knows, but statistically is also, the facts don't lie. I'll show you in a moment just how much wine is produced there. But Mendoza, the city, as opposed to the entire region, the city itself was founded in the 1560s. And then you have San Juan to the north, founded just afterwards. And it wasn't really until the King Philippe of Spain, who ruled the South Americas at the time, banned the production of wine, except for the church, that this industry started thriving. So you have Mendoza, you have San Juan, they're already established, but actually once they banned wine production, suddenly the wine production in South Africa thrived, and it was the main economic activity for Argentina at the time. So for 300 years, they focused on a variety called Criolla Chica, which is actually the same as País in Chile, and also the same as the Mission grape in California. So this was a variety that was brought over with a similar time to these countries, but Criolla Chica had its own little special name. And you can say they're the same grape variety, but they do have nuances now. They've been produced and the vines have been ever so slightly slowly evolving, much like a language, let's say, in all these different parts of the world. So it's not identical, but it is the same variety. By the end of the 1700s, though, there was through the Civil War, then, should we say, of the 19th century, the industry went into complete decline. And it really didn't pick up again until the 1850s. But most importantly for Argentina, and I think this is why Malbec has thrived so much, most importantly, in the 1850s, there was a nursery set up for grape varieties. So at this stage, you get really interesting plant material being set up in Argentina. They're actually studying it, thinking about it. And it's at that time that our varieties like Malbec are imported. And many of you may know that Malbec is also called Co in southwest France. But having spoken just this week to Dr. Laura Catena, who was helping me a little bit with the presentation for Tuesday, her and her researcher Jennifer from the Catena Institute very much think of Malbec and Cot as different, almost different grape varieties now. There's been so much change and evolution, which is fascinating. But this is because these varieties have been nurtured and cared for since the 1850s. The other thing that's very interesting around this time is that there is a railway. I'll get the map up again because it might be helpful, but there is a railway. It's not helpful particularly, but a railway is built that connects Buenos Aires and Mendoza. So suddenly the industry continues to thrive again. We've got good plant material coming from Europe. We've got a way of transporting our wine. And by the 20th century, Argentina actually becomes the 7th wealthiest developed country in the world. But as I'm sure we all know, we have an economic crisis, we have a political crisis, and then by the 1950s, sort of 100 years after this second boom, which I suppose you could call it, the industry is in a very, very different position to the 1950s of wine industries of Europe. So the main thing that's being produced is jug wine. So they call it vino de mesa, and it's quantity and not quality here. So to give you a good fact, in the 60s and 70s in the UK, we drank about 60 litres of wine per person per year. So, sorry, did I just say six? In the 60s and 70s, we drank 3 litres of wine per person per year. So 3 litres of wine is not far off what I've got on my table tonight with my 3 bottles. 3. Argentines drank around 90. So the capita consumption of wine in the 1960s and 70s in Argentina was huge, but the quality really wasn't there. And there was potential for quality, and this is why I love the history of Argentina so much. There was potential for quality, but they weren't taking this good plant material. They didn't have the understanding, they didn't have the technology, things like temperature control, to make of that really good plant material and the really good terroir what could have been a well-beating wine. Just as an FYI, Argentina don't drink 90 litres of wine per person per year anymore. It's around 25. So that number has come down. But what has happened is, as that number's come down, the quality has gone up. So around the 80s, they started exporting. And once the wines were on the international stage, the quality needed to get up with it. So you suddenly have this burst. But as that's happening, you have further economic problems, you have hyperinflation, and so that's also messing with the markets and messing with the prices of Argentinian wine at the same time. So that's the history in a nutshell. We're in a kind of golden age of Argentinian wine. The quality is now there, the technology is there, and it's probably been less appreciated than it should have been, considering it has got such a backstory and such a long history for all of the reasons I've just explained. So history lesson over, let's taste a wine, because Torrontés is not a wine that you should let get warm, and I'll explain why. So if you have got the Torrontés, please start tasting along if you haven't already. And I'll tell you a little bit about the variety, and then I'll tell you specifically about this wine. But there are 3 different types of Torrontés, and the most common is the one we have in the glass here. So Torrontés Riojano, not because it's from Rioja, funnily enough, even though it sounds like it is. This is a grape variety that is a natural cross between Criolla Chica, that I've just mentioned, and Muscat of Alexandria, which many of you will have tasted before. It's one of the 2 main Muscat varieties. But this is a natural cross, not something that was bred on purpose. The 2 grapes produced, in fact, several different versions of their sort of children, their offspring. But this is considered the top quality of the Torrontés offspring. It is the 2nd most planted grape variety, white, after Pedro Ximénez, not Pedro Jiménez from Spain, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there are 2 other species of Torrontés. This Torrontés Riojano is by far the most aromatic. It's very expressive. It can be a very alluring wine. It can also be a Marmite wine. Some people don't like it too much. The lesser versions, and I say lesser in really a numeric sense, that it's less is produced. So there's Rioja San Juanino, Torrontés San Juanino. Again, same parents, not as popular. It's a very special grape variety. Unsurprisingly, the name San Juanino is that northern that province just north of Mendoza I mentioned. So it's quite unique to that area, and there is less of it grown. It is also slightly less aromatic naturally. And then there's Torrontés Mendocino, very small amounts produced. And of that one, they know that one of the parents is Muscat of Alexandria, but they don't know what the other parent is. So to cut a long story short, you've got the first one in your glass, Torrontés Riojano, very expressive and sort of like a higher acidity Muscat. So it's got a very sort of grapey character. It's very peachy, very perfumed, often incredibly floral. And I think I'm getting quite a lot of that floral, actually, particularly today. It can be more on the green side. So you're getting things like, what am I thinking of? Not green gage, but maybe some slight gooseberry. If you got a bit of gooseberry, that wouldn't surprise me. But really kind of a melons, floral, peach, and lots of green grapes. And this is, I would say, a less aromatic version of a Torrontés. And the reason I say that is not because I'm dissing it. That's not the point. There are things that Susana Balbo has done to this Torrontés that are so different, so left field to other Torrontés. She's still kept the character for me, but the Marmite thing, which for me is that grape smell, pure grapes and not much else, she's really reined that in, and she has made a more fruity profile. If you drink a Torrontés that you sort of, a jug wine style Torrontés, they are often literally like schlur or grape juice with alcohol in. This is far more than that. So let me tell you a bit about it. Susana Balbo, we've got 2 of her wines this evening. We've got this and then our societies later on. It's interesting because well, I'll tell you where it's from first. So it's from Valle de Uco, which is the Uco Valley in Mendoza. And that's considered one of the top sites. So I think I put here we go. So you have different sections in Mendoza. Valle de Uco is arguably the top quality area. We'll talk more about this if you join me next Tuesday, because we're going to really drill down into this a bit more. And I'll touch on it later when we do geography. But the Valle de Uco is much higher than other parts of the region. So on average, you're looking at more like 1,100 plus meters above sea level. So what that's going to do already to our grapes and our eventual wine is it's going to allow our grapes to retain acidity. And you can't really even see it on this map, because one thing I will say about Argentina is Chile here on the left-hand side of the screen looks very much like a mountainous region, and maybe Argentina's on the flat. What's actually happening here is Mendoza, which is hugged up against the Andes, is actually on a plateau. So whilst it looks flat because you're not seeing lots of, oh, my dad would kill me, he was a geographer. What's the word I mean? The lines that show, anyway, it looks flat, it's not on the map. So I find this is it can look a little misleading. This Valle de Uco is basically your vineyard contours. Well done, James. Thank you. Had a brain blank. It's been a long day. But the Valle de Uco is, you're going to be starting at nearly 4,000 feet. So we are at a high altitude. You have the elevation to retain the acidity. So that's important part number one. The second part is that she's given this a really interesting expression, which Toby sums up perfectly here. Barrel fermented. So most Torrontés will always be produced in a stainless steel tank, and it's the same as you would do for a Muscat. You would keep it in steel, or if you haven't tried a Muscat or are less familiar, think about your Sauvignon Blancs perhaps. You keep it in a stainless steel container, you ferment it there, you age it there, or light aging, you know, maybe under a couple of months, sometimes maybe 2 or 3, and you want it to be its freshest, most fruity expression. And most Torrontés producers do that. Susana Balbo, who is such a pioneer of Argentinian winemaking, she was the first female winemaker in Argentina, full stop, the first enology graduate, so the first to graduate with a degree in winemaking. And she decided that Torrontés could do more than that, and she's done some quirky things here. So I love Toby's description. So barrel fermented in low toast, so that means not lots and lots of oak expression. When they've made the barrels, they haven't charred them lots, so you're not getting loads of vanilla and cream. You might get a hint. And the barrels are 600 liters, so they're bigger barrels, so your surface area to barrel, if you imagine you've got more liquid in a larger barrel, you're not going to have too much contact with the oak. But what it's done is it's changed the texture. So broadened the palate. It's made, I think I just saw someone in the chat mention about the lees as well. The lees will add this creamy nature, this kind of unctuousness. And it's quite unusual for Torrontés, but I think that this will be the future of the grape if people start recognizing that it doesn't just have to be fruity tooty. There's a lovely style that is the fruity tooty, but this for me is where you get fine wine, like a fine wine status. So I want to feel the texture of that lees and that oak. I've already got the smells. I have got that touch of vanilla. I've got the peach that Toby mentioned. So let's think about texture. I should also mention, before I even go on to texture, that Torrontés naturally doesn't have particularly high acidity. So for all of this activity to happen, you would do something like this to a grape like, well, Chardonnay doesn't have the highest acidity, but perhaps a Chablis, which is a cool climate Chardonnay, because the acidity usually balances everything out. Now, the one thing Torrontés has slightly against it is it doesn't have that sort of naturally refreshing mouthwater character. And that's why I think a lot of people tried to preserve the fruit to make it seem more refreshing. But for me here, that having the faith in it to be from Valle de Uco, to be from an expensive region, i.e. a cool climate where you could be producing top-end Cabernets, top-end, and a lot of the wines that Susanna Balbo makes are from this region. But this is her signature collection. She's not afraid to take a variety that is hit and miss, should we say, in the wine world, and she's really put her stamp on it. And I think it's great. My personal preference is for this against the fruitier, lightweight styles. But again, that's just a personal preference. If you are a huge Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio fan, you might find that the Torrontés in a less lees aged, not barrel fermented style is more for you. But I think the complexity for this is what does it for me. So if you are trying it, Chris has said on the lees coming through strongly. I totally agree. It's got this real breadth, and it feels, when I say heavy on the mouth, I don't mean flabby, but you can definitely sense that it's got this weight behind it, which is quite clever. And Peter Cousins has said, I like this Torrontés, but then I really like Muscat. I do get quite a lot of vanilla, even though the wine says a tiny hint. I agree. And I think, do you know what the other thing is? I often, when I find peaches, find vanilla comes through more strongly. And I don't know whether that's a peaches and ice cream thing, but this is a very peachy wine. So I totally agree. Yes, I'll be keen to hear what else you think. So I am, Beth said, always been scared to try Torrontés due to hearing the description of potpourri. That's the floral. It's often very floral, often very light, Beth. And that is exactly why people say things like it smells like potpourri or flowers. Don't be put off. It's, I think good ones are really good. I think, unfortunately, it's a great variety when in the wrong hands, it can do unpleasant, or not unpleasant, but unsatisfying things. So I think for me, you need to look at a good producer when you're looking for a Torrontés, and yeah, go from there. And she says keen to try this one, so I'm glad. So this gives you a little bit of an idea about where we're talking. I mentioned earlier flanked, the Uco very much flanked by the Andes and the mountain ranges. In fact, large parts, most of Mendoza, you can't escape from seeing a mountain. So let's talk about varieties. I'm going to whiz through these. I'm only going to whiz through them because I can send you these slides, so we don't need to talk about it too much, but I'll just give you a little one-liner about each of the varieties. But these are the top 5 whites. So we've got Pedro Ximénez, I already mentioned. Now that's where you are getting a lot of your jug wine. Some people are trying to produce top quality Pedro Ximénez. I don't know how good that will be. Naturally, it's very productive. It's quite neutral. Often it's just made into concentrated must. So for sweetening wines, you would use a must made from Pedro Ximénez. And interestingly, it's actually a cross again. So it's a natural cross again of those same 2 grape varieties, but it's just a very productive version with completely different characters to Torrontés Riojano. We've got then Torrontés Riojano, which we've just tasted. Same cross, different outcome, much more aromatic, much more interesting, and definitely capable of producing finer wines, and also, quite frankly, capable of producing wines with more character. We've then got Chardonnay. So Chardonnay has become a really big focus in Argentina, and actually there's a huge amount of fine wine potential in Chardonnay of Argentina. One of the main reasons are these really top quality cool climates. So I'll talk a little bit about the regions and what to expect. But the Uco Valley that we've just tasted, 40% of the Chardonnay in Argentina is coming from that valley, that really high elevation, cool nights, retaining acidity. And it's even so cool that they can make sparkling wines in a champagne style. So even though we're talking about sunny Argentinian days, we're also talking about a very cool spot in the Uco Valley. We then got Muscat of Alexandria. It's easy drinking, but it's the parent of some very important varieties that we've already mentioned for both quantity and quality. The one good thing about Muscat of Alexandria that makes it good here, that also makes it good for the other two varieties in this top 5 list, our Pedro Jimenez and our Torrontés, is that it can handle heat very well. So interestingly, Chardonnay can't. It gets quite flabby and round and fat. Muscat actually can, even though ironically it doesn't taste like it should. So in the warmer regions like San Juan, it does quite well. And then Sauvignon Blanc, that doesn't sound like much at 5.4% total production, but that has actually doubled since 2002. It was Chardonnay's also risen massively. The other 3 were certainly leading the pack, but Chardonnay was introduced or was popular for longer. It's only just recently that Sauvignon Blanc in the last sort of 20 years has really started to thrive. And if you like your citrusy tropical styles of Sauvignon Blanc, then it's worth giving Argentinian ones a try. They're sort of finding a regional identity for each of the places, but you are going to want to look for your cool climates again, your Salta, your Uco Valley, and we'll talk about which ones are cool climates in a moment. I'll do the same for reds, and then we'll taste a red. How about that? Nicholas has just said, I can't stop thinking of the Football's Wives character Chardonnay if I hear that wine noun. It's true. At least we don't have any Muscat of Alexandria children, which would be very awkward. So let's talk about reds. If you do have a red in your glass, obviously feel free to taste along. If you don't worry. But I'll quickly zoom through these as well. Malbec, you can see here, there's very few countries, and I'll cover this more on Tuesday. There's very few countries that have such a dominant single grape variety as Malbec and Argentina. I'm sure you could name the others if you want to in the chat, go for it. But there's probably, I would argue, 4 countries in the world with such a strong position on one wine, but it actually only started being popular in the 1990s, and it's quadrupled since then. Although it's planted all over Argentina, 85% of all Malbec does come from Mendoza. We're going to have a Mendozan Malbec later, and that's going to be the whole point of next week. So it's a big deal in Argentina, too big to lump with an overview. It's really the calling card of the Argentinian wine industry in general. So someone's been given a different Malbec. Yes, you can be forgiven, don't worry. Luckily, dare I say it, I'm going to talk more broadly about Argentinian Malbec, so don't worry yet. But we are going to taste the Bonarda first. So I'll cover Bonarda in a moment. In fact, I'm going to leapfrog Bonarda because it is such a wonderful grape variety. I want to give it some due diligence as I talk about the Bonarda that I've got in my glass. And I'll talk about wines 3, 4, and 5 first instead. So Cabernet Sauvignon. This is again mainly in Mendoza, and it does suit that plateau. And the plateau is, the reason the plateau is so well suited for Cabernet Sauvignon is it loves the really long growing season. So it essentially doesn't like to get too hot, but it needs to get warm enough for long enough in order to ripen fully. And that's the sort of most basic way I can explain it. And if you've got a sunny area, but a cooling influence, that warm enough for long enough effect starts to come in. So Cabernet is really lovely here. In the north, it does have a quite unique red roast pepper character, which some people like, some people don't. But down in Mendoza, it's making that kind of lovely international, almost, I don't want to say homogenous to international styles because the quality is there, and that sounds dismissive. But you can find it a lot of different ways, I suppose. You can find it oaked, unoaked, very aged, like a brand like Vinert would do. You can find it with a lot less age, something fresh and fruity. So it can be a real broad sense Cabernet Sauvignon. Syrah is actually still really high as well. And it's mostly warm climate Syrah from the sunnier regions, so big, full-bodied, fruity. They've started to make a lot more on the cooler sites. So you will find, I think, coming into the market now, this kind of cool climate, peppery, but black pepper Syrah, which is very interesting and very, very delicious. And then Tempranillo. Out of the full list, this is really the only grape that thrives in hot out of your red collection. So this is the main grape in Rioja, and it's grown in, even though it's grown in Mendoza, actually, it's often in the lower altitude parts. So in your warmer regions of Mendoza. And it's warm, but it's easy drinking, fruity, very, very tasty. So there are some in the Uco Valley, and they make this kind of classic tannic style, but a lot of it is making very friendly, approachable, slightly higher alcohol, fruity wines. So yes, that is great varieties for you. Should we do, I'll quickly do, yes, let's do this first, and then we'll talk about climate. Yes, Chris, peppery Southern Hemisphere Cabernet can happen. I think I mentioned that it was peppery Southern Hemisphere Syrah though, but the red pepper is the northern regions of Argentina make the red pepper flavor, which is slightly different. But peppery, as in black pepper, is usually your cool climate Syrah. So that's more what's becoming trendier, should we say, in Argentina. And Claire's just said you can't get a bad red. Praise indeed. Actually, whilst we're on to climate, let's just quickly talk about climate, and I'm going to swell my glass a little bit as well. So climate of Argentina. I'll just jump back to the map. So they are quite dispersed, but what you can see, and I think this is important, is Argentinian wine regions are essentially running down the foothills of the Andes. At every point, there are obviously exceptions down here in Rio Negro, La Pampa as well, but this particular concentration is running along the foothills of the Andes. Essentially, the Chilean wine industry and the Argentinian wine industry almost mirror each other. And the key difference is that here we're talking about a continental climate. What Chile has, again, I've got an introduction to Chile coming up, so do join, but what Chile has are cool, moderating influences from the sea. It's also got a little bit of effect from the Andes, but the sea, the Pacific Ocean, makes Chile very cool. What makes Argentina cool is the elevation. So it is growing at that higher altitude, and not always. So the varying altitudes, again, we'll go into this on Tuesday because it's one of my favorite topics. The varying altitudes in Argentina make for very diverse terroir. But it's continental. So warm summers, cooler winters, and there's this high diurnal range across the board largely that I mentioned. Obviously, the further you get away from the equator, it's going to get cooler, unless then altitude comes into play, because then you start to get really high up in somewhere like the Uco Valley, and it's even colder than down in the south. But one of the most fascinating things about Argentina that I would say sets it apart from a lot of wine growing regions is the hail, or countries I should say, and Mendoza in particular. It's localized hailstorms that, honestly, summer hail they're called piedra, can be the size of golf balls or bigger, quite dangerous. And what you will often see in Argentina, and if people have visited or been before, is lots of netting. But netting is very expensive. And one of the problems is you don't know where the hail is going to hit. So it's a really big challenge in Argentina. And instead of your grapes all getting destroyed by hail, they don't all, because it's all localized. What you end up with is there are some good quality single vineyard Argentinian wines, but one of the key things I would say about the Argentinian producers, the big ones, is they often used to blend, historically would blend lots of different parcels to produce a wine. And that's become a stylistic thing, but it's often because in some years, one entire vineyard can be wiped out by those hailstorms. So there became this kind of, let's hedge almost, you know, let's put vineyards in a few spots and let's hope that 70% don't get hail. And so there's an almost logistical thing going on there, which makes Argentina quite different. Argentinian wine quite different. So that's one of the key things as well. But when we go in to talk about altitude, and I'm also encourage you to watch, we did an altitude session a while back. It was probably over a year ago now. One of the topics of discussion that we had that Laura Catena explained was that one of the other differences about Argentina is not only could you have a hailstorm 30 minutes away and all your grapes be fine here, but not 30 minutes away. The other thing is that as soon as you drive through the mountains and get these altitudinal changes, you can go from, you know, within under an hour, you can do a change in the Winkler scale, which is the comparison of heat degree days and sunshine hours, the summation of sunshine hours. And it's how they calculate how warm a wine growing region is, or it's how some people calculate how warm a wine growing region is. You can, in less than an hour, drive from the equivalent of the Champagne, cool Champagne sparkling wine regions, right through to the Southern Rhone, you know, hot, alcoholic red wines. And that can happen at a much faster pace because of all this altitude. So yes, altitude and hail, if you remember nothing else, those are the two most important things. Oh, and there is a lovely wind called the Zonda, and it's a hot, dry wind. And if ever anyone is interested in things like organic viticulture, Argentina is a really interesting place to study because they're actually at quite a low risk of some diseases because they have this hot, dry wind called Zonda, and it cleans everything out. And this is most fascinating. They have a species of phylloxera in Argentina, so the nasty little bug that eats all your roots, or at least bites them, infects them, and kills your vine. They have the aphid that phylloxera is born on. They have a version that doesn't recreate or doesn't spawn. So their phylloxera controls are pretty loose. You don't necessarily have to graft, so they don't necessarily have to put different rootstocks on their vines. And they don't know why. It's a sort of freak phenomenon, which is another reason I love Argentina. There's so much to discover. So let's talk about the Bonarda, because I've teased you with it for long enough, I think. So we have got our Bonarda here. Funnily enough, I've just mentioned Laura Catena twice. This is actually made by her sister. So let me tell you about Bonarda first, because regardless of whether you have this Bonarda or any Bonarda this evening, what I should be able to tell you is relevant either way, because Bonarda is what the Argentines, thought was a very, very old traditional grape. And they thought it tasted something like Barbera, possibly from Spain. So Barbera is not from Spain, by the way. Barbera is Italian, but they thought that Barbera, it might have been brought from Spain, and they thought that it might be Barbera from Italy because it has similar tastes. Now, here, it is producing a wine that is quite similar to Barbera in many senses. So you're getting this really incredible blue fruit, very, very perfumed, aromatic, but friendly, not at all austere. It's very giving, got kind of like a sweet juiciness to the nose. Somebody's just said only 4 stars for this wine is criminal. Yes, well, quite. DNA profiling, however, has shown that this is actually a grape that the Californians call Chabono, even though there's only about 40 hectares now grown in Napa. But perhaps even more interesting is that it's actually the same grape variety as a Savoie grape variety, so an Alpine variety called Duché Noir or Duché Noir, which I have tasted, and I must say does not taste like this wine, in my opinion. There's a few reasons for that. Let's explain them. So the high altitude of Mendoza means that there is lower levels of UV. And so one of the reasons might be, why is this juicier? Why is this rounder? Why is this more tannic? The lower levels of UV, the lower atmosphere at high elevation. Let me start again because I've made that sound more complicated than it is. The higher you go, the lower levels of atmosphere. So when your atmosphere is thinner, UV can penetrate harder. It's why when you go skiing, you get sunburnt more easily, amongst other reasons. And what that does to red grape varieties is it can basically force them to make a protective layer on themselves, and it can force their grape skins to grow thicker. And a lot of studies have been done about Malbec and this phenomenon. I don't know if any studies have been done in Bonarda, but one of the reasons might be that this particularly high altitude, higher than Savoie, although Savoie is high in European standards, it is not high in Argentinian standards. That could be explaining part of this kind of very different textural difference to the two grape varieties. Another, and I think I've just had a mention of it, somebody's mentioned Foudre. So Foudre are very interesting, very popular in Argentina. One of the reasons is that they are very popular in northern parts of Italy. They're basically huge, usually 500-litre, but often could be more. They're sort of 500-litre minimum, big oak barrels. And they're not designed for little ones that you roll around. They're static. And they very slowly give your wine a massage rather than giving it more flavor. So if you see a wine's been aged in Foudre, you shouldn't be expected to, and here it's 100-year-old one, so it's definitely not going to give you any flavor because all of that flavor has been leached out anyway. What they're saying when they write that down, or they being Toby in this case, but when a winemaker tells you that, the reason they're saying it's a Foudre as opposed to a barrique, one of the little ones, is that they're saying they haven't wanted to impart flavor, but they have wanted to give their wine a little bit of oxygen. And what that does is it changes the texture slightly, it changes the mouthfeel, but it doesn't impart, loads and loads of vanilla. So I think that's the other reason, basically, is what I'm getting at. The Argentines obviously have a completely different way of producing this Duché Noir from Savoie over centuries of not knowing that that's what it was. And so I mentioned earlier languages, it's almost like they've taken the same basic product, but the cultures have been so different in the way they produce it. And yes, it's very different, should we say. So let's talk about this particular wine. In fact, taste it first because it's so delicious. I can't not. It has got that lovely vibrancy. And again, you can see why, you can see the similarities, I think, more in the acid structure to the Savoie wines, because it does have this tart acidity, which is really good for me. Some people might find it a bit bitter, perhaps. If you're finding it bitter, then I would really strongly suggest tasting it alongside food, particularly salty food. I love that, but it's not to everyone's taste, I know. It's also got the grape variety Cabernet Franc blended in. And Cabernet Franc does have this quite austere acid, which is fresh and peppery. And we've mentioned pepper so much today. But this for me is, I know it's not going to be soft and supple like a lot of the Malbecs are, but actually this for me is really, really good food wine. The soft, supple Malbecs are often quite good for quaffing. This Bonarda is, for me, you need to pair it with food. So it's a passion project between, I've already mentioned one partner, which is Adriana Catena, Laura's sister, and she's part of the Catena Zapata group, so that Nicolas Catena started. and very, very famous, probably in the top 3 most famous Argentinian wine families and producers ever. And it's Alejandro Vigil, who is the winemaker. Oh, sorry, he's not. He's the winemaker on this project, but he's actually the soil expert from Catena. And they got together, and Adriana is coming into the wine business more, but actually was a celebrated historian and is an incredible academic. And she's started to get more and more into the business. And I think the story goes that they were in London together doing an event, and they started talking about all of these incredible missing varieties. And Cabernet Franc was one of the ones that they really wanted to shout about. And the Cabernet Franc in this is actually from nearly 1,500 meters. It doesn't say, it's around that. The Bonarda is actually from lower down. It's got such high natural acidity, it doesn't really need to be grown as high. But the Cabernet Franc's grown at a really high altitude, and that's Cabernet Franc is one of the reasons that this entire label started in the first place. But as they started exploring, naturally you've got one historian, one soil expert. So you've got the soil expert picking all the beautiful places for the grapes, and the historian saying, let's get this beautiful Argentinian, it's not an Argentinian grape variety, but it's certainly a specialty of Argentina, more celebrated. So they do wild yeast, they ferment for long, they ferment, but then they do a long post-fermentation macerations. They basically leave the grape skins in the juice, extracting that amazing color. I mean, this is a wine you don't want to spill on the carpet. And then they put it into foudre. Now, this isn't actually a foudre, this is a cement egg. I just wanted to show you, because they are a lovely combination of sort of history and modern modern winemaking. So whilst they have these 100-year-old foudres, they also have brand new, very expensive concrete cement eggs, and they're always experimenting. So their brand, I have to say, is one that I would strongly recommend members keep an eye out for. So El Enemigo, and I don't know if it's common knowledge a lot, so I won't tell you which wine, but one of their wines has just won 100 points, if points interest you. I found out this week, but I don't know if I'm allowed to reveal which. Might cause a run on it, but keep your eyes peeled. So that's your Bonarda. Who I've seen some people say they really liked it. I'm so glad. This was the wine I really wanted to show, I will be honest. Diana's just said the Romans fermented wine in concrete. They did, Diana, but I can assure you now they were not epoxy resin lined eggs made for several hundreds of thousands of dollars like those ones. They were more in the port style of let's make a concrete bath. So yes, they weren't maybe as ergonomically beautiful either, but yes, you're quite right. So maybe that's it. It's the lovely balance of beautiful history and modernization that this particular brand does so well. So let's cover some regions. I promised you I would, and then we'll go to our Mendoza Argentinian Malbec. So I've already mentioned that Mendoza is the vast majority of all production by a long way in Argentina. It always varies year on year, but it's always over 70% without a doubt, even with bad hailstorms, etc. Flanked by the Andes, and again, I've shown you a couple of pictures about the skyline. You can barely avoid seeing the mountains, but because of this plateau, all the vineyards pretty much are starting at an elevation that we don't even see in most parts of Europe. Really, it's sort of a whole different world. It's divided into departments, Mendoza, and then it's divided into districts and then into single vineyards. As I mentioned earlier, you're not going to get too many single vineyards Argentinian wines, but they are on the way up. So you'll find some, but just they're not as commonplace, should we say, as Californian versions, for all the reasons I've said. I won't go too much into this, but I will say that Mendoza is the home. It's where the first appellations were. 1993 was actually the first appellations in Argentina. So the first designated areas like the ones you can see on the screen here. And it is the epicenter. The top producers are based here, even if they have vineyards spread about, but different pockets of Mendoza have incredibly different specialities. We've already spoken heavily about Uco, which is kind of cool, high elevation. We have Luyan de Cuyo on this map here. This zone here up the top is called the Primera zone. And it's really the first zone that produces top quality wine. Naturally, as you can imagine, as people spread out from the city, it's where all of the very, very traditional winemaking is. And so actually what you've got there is your kind of heartland of the Argentinian wine scene. But what have we got from beyond Mendoza? I've already mentioned San Juan, which is the second largest region, about 100 miles north of the regions of the Mendoza area. Much hotter. Your summers here can get to 42 degrees. And it's those high-yielding varietals I mentioned. So your Criollas, you've got your some Tempranillo there as well. But you're not going to get your top quality wine a lot. It's more of your really good value reds. And curiously, some sherry styles as well, with also brandy and vermouth produced there, which is hardly surprising when you've got some quite productive, but perhaps not very expressive grape varieties. Then you have the La Rioja, just to the north of that light green area. This is the oldest wine region in Argentina. So it's not the old Mendoza at the north. The Primera zone was the first part of Mendoza, but La Rioja is the oldest in the whole country. Mostly planted to Torrontés, the variety, the Riojano one. Surprise, surprise, it's in the name. But dominated by a big co-op. So actually, it's not very common on the export market, La Rioja. And I'm not surprised, because I think there would be some confusion with Rioja from Spain. Then right up top here, which is is Salta, really close to the equator. But the reason I want to mention it is you shouldn't be able to grow grapes here. But because it's so high, some of, if not the highest commercial vineyards in the world, as high as 3,000 meters above sea level, because it's so high, you can produce good quality grapes. And then if we just zoom all the way down to the bottom, we've got Rio Negro, which is cooler climates further away, and you start to get your good quality white wines here. So Torrontés, the Semillon, Riesling. I think it's worth looking out for these areas. And you would also Neuquén, which I can never pronounce, is really up and coming as well. And these regions are introducing things like Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc at top quality. So look out for Salta. Judith just said Torrontés from Salta, high altitude is delicious. Yeah, I think if I was going to have a place to watch, I'd go to each end of the spectrum here. I'd go for Salta in the north, where you've got your mad high altitude. And then I'd go down to Rio Negro, which is just such a different spot. So I'd try both of those if you haven't before. But we're going to finish in the heartland, because I said we would. We're going to finish with our Society's Argentinian Malbec. And the reason I was really pleased to finish with this wine is it's an exclusive for us, made by Susana Balbo, who made our first wine as well. Sorry, Nicholas, he said Neuquén. I don't know why I struggle with that so much. I think it's because I want to call it Neuquén. I don't know. It's not great for me. I think I'm over Spanishing it. He's just said I don't speak Spanish. I speak a bit of Spanish, but for some reason, that word doesn't agree with me. So we've got our Society's Argentine Malbec. And as I mentioned, it's made for us exclusively, blended with Toby by Susana Balbo. Susana Balbo's winery, I should mention, is called Dominio del Plata. And it's the nice thing about this wine, which is actually I think, get it whilst you can personally, is yes, Malbec can be lovely and fruity, and this is, but it's also quite spicy. And Susanna Balbo does not make these kind of showy wines that have no definition. So whilst Malbec is much fruitier than Caux from the southwest of France in general, I mentioned right at the beginning that the styles have sort of moved away, and to the point where the actual grape material is becoming different now because of, you get your really fruity one, you keep replanting that. So Malbec is very fruity in Argentina, you can't deny it, but Susanna doesn't make these overly tutti fruity fruit bombs, and 2021 was quite a cool year. So whilst it is intensely fruity, as Toby says, it's not, it's ever so slightly leaner. So I find this far more suitable for drinking all year round and more suitable for food. So have a little smell. I think you get more fruit on the nose, but I don't just get fruit. I get this really beautiful, sometimes with really nice Malbec. And I think for $7.95, this is a good example. This touch of violets, floral, but not sickly in any way. And it's that floral black character, something ever so slightly earthy, but mainly this, again, blueberry, blackcurrant, blackberry notes. Beth said this is incredible value. Yeah, I was excited to share it for the value alone. I just think it's such a good wine, and now it's under £8. And Susanna Balbo herself is fabulous. So I already mentioned that she was the first graduate enologist of Argentina in the 80s. What's really interesting as well is when she started her career, she couldn't find a job in Mendoza. So I'm glad that other people are getting the violets. Yeah, it's lovely. That's the best for me. If a Malbec has violets, I love it. It doesn't need to taste like, vanilla blueberry pie. It should have something else to it. And this one does for £8. It's crazy. What was I saying about Susanna? Yeah, she couldn't get a job in Mendoza. She could not find a job. So she had to go down to Salta, we've just been talking about, to Cafayete. And she got a job there and slowly made her way through up the ladder, should we say. And since then, she's obviously now one of the most renowned winemakers in the whole country. And Wines of Argentina have made her president 3 times. So I don't think anybody else has ever been the president of Wines of Argentina. So I need to get my dates right. 2006 to 2008. And then they just carried it on 2008 to 2010. And then I think she had a little break. And then about 2016 did it again for 2 years. So she's basically been the ambassador for Malbec for a large portion of the last 20 years. And for that reason alone, I think she's a perfect candidate for us to finish an event on Argentina about. She's really been at the forefront of Argentinian wine production. And this particular Malbec is under £8, but it's made by her fair hand, blended by Toby Morral, our buyer for Argentina, and is such stonking quality that I think it shows what Argentina's future could even be. It would be very easy for me to have done 3 fine wines for this tasting, and we'd have all enjoyed it. But I think one of the beauties of Argentina is it doesn't have to be expensive. There's not many places around the world I think you can get a wine for £8 at this quality. So please let me know what you think in the chat. I'm going to taste it and let you know how I feel about the tannins and the structure, but it's a friendly wine. It's a juicy wine. It's often on our wine rack at home as a not sure what to drink and friends are over. And that would be, you just pick it up and everybody loves it. Chris has said very integrated for a 2-year-old wine. Totally agree. And those tannins aren't too heavy. This isn't an oaked wine. It's not designed to age for ages. It's a pleasant, pleasurable wine. And that for me is what Malbec's all about when it's done in this style. It's very hard to dislike. And the cooler climate, dare I say, is bringing it in at 13.5% for a 2021. And although I shouldn't say it, I think cooler year Malbecs are my preference. Obviously drink Malbecs all the time, and any year is fine, but a cooler year I think is great. So I'm going to taste it. I keep jabbering on. All the comments about it being integrated, I think, are spot on. It's got just enough tannin to have grip, but it's got this lovely tart fruit that makes you salivate. It makes you want to grab a bite to eat. So that's delicious for me. We've only had one question really, which is, so with your medium rare ribeye, would Pauillac or Malbec be preferred? Just curious, price apart, of course. If I were having steak, this is a very strange thing to say. It would depend on, well, age of the wines would be one. Depends what sauces I'm going to have. But if it was just a really, really good juicy ribeye steak with salt, I would genuinely go for Malbec. I think Beth said this is kind of like if French and Argentine Malbec had a baby. I know exactly what you mean. Great zingy freshness. I think I would go Malbec for a steak. Yes, roast beef, thinly sliced roast beef, I'd be moving towards my Pauillac. But I think for just a really nice salty ribeye, then yes, I would go Malbec. Right, well, we're bang on time. I've just seen a comment, Julian, saying he's flying to Buenos Aires tomorrow, followed by Mendoza and Salta for 2 weeks, and a great session to kick it off. I couldn't be more jealous, Julian, and as soon as I can, I'm going to try and get myself over to Argentina. For anyone interested, Buenos Aires is starting to plant wine now. Plant grapes, but they have a very, very different climate, naturally being on the coast. They have a tropical climate and they get 2 growing seasons, which is crazy. So I would like to explore that personally for all my geeky wine love reasons. I want to see what's happening there. But the wine scene in Argentina and in Brazil are both kicking off in particular. So if you do get a chance to go to Brazil as well, anyone, I encourage it. The wine's interesting, but for the same reasons that Buenos Aires is perhaps struggling, should we say, with 2 seasons, as is Brazil. So I jabbed on about Brazil there and I didn't want to, but I really hope you enjoyed the session. I hope that you go out and explore more Argentinian wines. They are underestimated, they are often undervalued, and I think the really nice thing is that you can buy wines for £8, you can buy wines for £80 in Argentina, and often they're priced pretty accurately, but pretty well. So please do enjoy. If you've got any questions, as always, I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow. Thank you, Mahesh, behind the scenes. And I hope that I'll see some of you at my introduction to Chile or my deep dive on Malbec next week with a focus on Mendoza. So cheers, everyone. Have a lovely evening. And I hope that somebody has a nice steak or a nice bit of aubergine to go with that Malbec. Cheers all. Thank you.